Right, guys, welcome back to the Golden Middle Age. It's TJ with you, and today, as you can see, we have a very special guest with us. Isaac, welcome to the channel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Me and Isaac got in touch on social media, and he actually has a page of his own, and it's a podcast, I believe, called well, let me check it again. I should know, we just spoke about it, the Unending Podcast,
The Unending Catastrophe.
the Unending Catastrophe Podcast. Yes.
Yes. And
Yes, if you could
it's
describe what you
basically
do there, if that would be great.
it's a history of Palestine from the late 17th century up until 1948.
Amazing, amazing. And you're Palestinian yourself, of course. You're
Yes, my father was born in Jerusalem.
amazing, amazing. That's great to hear. So, hopefully today, what we're going to try and discuss is the history of Palestine, specifically in regards to Christianity, because I think that's a topic that sometimes is overlooked with the ongoing
Yes.
catastrophe in Palestine and what has been going on for the past 75 years. It's affected all Palestinians, specifically the minorities as well, such as the Christians. So hopefully today we're going to shed light on some of the history of Christianity in the Levant region, trying to focus on Palestine, of course, and linking it to the contemporary affairs and what's going on today. So let's jump right in. Isaac, if you'd like to
Certainly.
start with your sort of background and what you're mainly interested in when it comes to the history side.
Well, I was inspired to do my podcast, if we want to talk about that for a second. I was inspired to do my
Sure.
podcast after listening to the Martyr Made podcast called Fear and Loathing in New Jerusalem, which is a 30-hour, six-part podcast about the history of Zionism
Mm.
up until 1948 by a guy named Daryl Cooper. And that podcast, the Martyr Made podcast, has a bunch of other really awesome subjects that he goes deep into. But the first one was about Palestine, and I thought it was very well done. There's stuff that I didn't know about that he touched on. But I think the issue is that when people talk about this, I noticed, especially in podcast form or video form, at least in my experience, I noticed that the Palestinian experience is always inherently connected to the Zionist experience to the point of where it's an afterthought in comparison to the Zionist experience. The Zionists are acting in this way, the Zionists are doing this. They have these struggles, they have these issues they're dealing with. And even when people talk about the atrocities that the Zionists committed, especially in 1948 or even during the Arab Revolt from 36 to 39, it's almost as if the Arabs, as if the Palestinians are still an afterthought to that. And I wanted to create a podcast that talked about this history from their perspective. What, look, and the Zionists coming in and what that was like to them and how they were affected by it. And I wanted to start in the 17th century because initially I was like, I'm gonna do like 4,000 years of history. And then I was like, that there's a lot to talk about. And then I'm like, okay, let's just do it from Jesus up until now. And I'm like, okay, there's still a lot to talk about. But then I figured because we're still on the first episode and the next episode's coming out in the next couple months because there's a lot of research to do even just for that. I would rather start with Zahar al-Umar, the first Palestinian king, as it were. And I thought that this would be a great way to start because it very much dispels the myth that Palestine is a new fabrication of the 20th century.
Okay.
Because Zahar al-Umar, he was, I don't know if you know who he is, but just he was a man that rose to the ranks of the Ottoman politics, became the governor of Nablus Sanjak, and then
Hmm.
eventually, with the help of the Russian Empire through financing, carved out a kingdom of his own from Gaza all the way up to Beirut. And he was a Sunni Muslim. He was a very competent, skilled military commander, very good administrator. And what was interesting is that his religious tolerance was such that Christians and Jews would actually migrate to the little kingdom that he created because it was better to live there than in other parts of the empire.
Wow. That's really
And
interesting to hear.
yeah, unfortunately, he was killed in 1774
Okay.
when the Ottomans launched a naval attack on Akka, no, on Acre, and the Ottomans took it back eventually. But that's where I wanted to start off because I wanted people to know Palestine is real. It's existed for millennia, and I think that this is a really good modern understanding of what Palestine is.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think that's great. And to be honest, I'll be definitely tuning into the work you're doing on the podcast. So that's great. And I'll leave a link into the in the description below for people that want to check it out. But before we start the from that point, 17th century, I want to take it a little bit further back. So obviously on this channel we do focus on medieval history, but even if we could go back before that and talk about Christianity as a whole in the Levant region, specifically in Palestine, because we all know Jesus, Nabi Isa, who is a revered figure in both Christianity and Islam. His
Mhm.
birthplace was in Palestine. So if you could highlight the significance of Christianity in the region and the sort of evolution.
Well, I mean, Christianity itself is essential to Palestine. It's inherent to Palestine. It is Palestinian Christians are actually genetically speaking the closest descendants of the original people of Israel and of the indigenous people there, with Palestinian, Lebanese, and Jordanian Muslims having the second closest relationship.
Yeah,
Uh, there is so much of the architecture that you see in Palestine is very heavily Christian. Like I think you discussed this in the video where if you notice some of the mosques you see in Palestine look look very European in a weird way, and that's because they were churches.
yeah,
And in the tumultuous history of the Levant, as Christians wrestled control of it, and then the Muslims would take control of it, churches would turn into mosques, and mosques would turn into churches, and it created this really interesting, just mixed Mediterranean, Arab, and European architecture that you don't really see in anywhere else in the Arab world. Um,
yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand how Christianity is just it's incredibly pivotal to Palestine, especially because so many empires were and the kingdoms were in the area were really dead set on controlling Jerusalem. I mean, the Byzantine Empire, well, the Romans basically, because they called themselves Romans. We call them Byzantines, but the Romans essentially like controlling Jerusalem was of great importance to them until eventually it was taken from them by the Rashidun Caliphate,
Mm.
and like you had like what 4 centuries of war over multiple crusades over it. Um, the Jerusalem would engage in the patriarchs of Jerusalem would engage in serious theological discussions with other patriarchs and bishops of Antioch and Alexandria, and Jerusalem and Gaza were places of deep theological discussion and research. Um, some of the most beautiful poetry comes from that area. The Ghassanid kingdoms always had at least some control, if not full control, of Palestine, depending on what time period we're talking about. So Christianity is pivotal and important. And to get rid of Christianity from Palestine is to literally kill a component of the soul of Palestine. It really is.
Of course. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's this sort of history that makes Palestine unique, right? As you said, it's a combination of different cultures, different religions, East and West, all sort of merged into one land.
I
And
tell people, if
yeah,
you know, I tell people in the
of
same
course.
way that how when you combine a Greek with a Russian, you get a Serb. When you combine a Greek with an Arab, you get a Palestinian in so many ways. It's a bit
Okay.
of a simple way of saying it, but yeah, it's just like it really is that east-west connection that a lot of people, I don't think, fully appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is what sort of, let's say, sparked the conflict in the medieval times, for example, with the Crusaders, right? The Europeans saw this as their holy land, of course, and they obviously with the mission of the Knight Order of the Knights Templars was to protect pilgrims going into Palestine. So the fact that there are European Christian pilgrims doing pilgrimage in Palestine, already that point itself says a lot about the history of Christianity in that region. And I think the wars that were sparked during that era, especially with the famous Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi and Richard the Lionheart. So if you could go into that as well and sort of give us your take on it.
Well, my take on it is that I'm not one to be like lay epic centrist as it is and to say both sides are wrong or both sides are right. But it really does feel that when people talk about the Crusades, it's either the Crusaders are these gallant heroes trying to liberate the Holy Land from the evil Muslim hordes, or the Crusaders were these evil, bloodthirsty Christians that just wanted to slaughter and kill everything they saw. And Salah ad-Din came nobly to rid these European invaders from Muslim lands, when the reality is a lot more complex. So, in the century leading up to the First Crusade, there was a whole host of political events going on. You had the split between East and West when Constantinople and Rome broke communion with each other in 1054. In the year 1004, the Fatimid Caliph had actually burnt down Kanis al-Qiyamah, the Sepulchre Church.
Mm.
Which was an incredibly unpopular move amongst the Islamic world and within Palestine itself. It shocked a lot of people.
Yeah,
There were issues of pirates capturing and enslaving Christian pilgrims, and there was also the real and serious political concerns where popes were thinking, "Hey, if I can control Jerusalem, I could reunite the church, and I could have a larger, stronger political force." And again, we're talking about a series of events spanning nearly a century, where you have multiple popes thinking about and ruminating on it, multiple political figures, East and West, dealing with it. The Byzantines are involved. And eventually, it all culminates to that First Crusade.
yeah,
Uh, and for me, when I think of the Crusades, there's something very romantic about it. When I think of Salah ad-Din, he's a very romantic character to me.
yeah,
Uh, very the same thing with Richard the Lionhearted, and the same thing with Baldwin the Fourth. I think Baldwin the Fourth is one of the most underrated kings. Uh, I don't think people really appreciate how brilliant and pious and wise Baldwin the Fourth is. And it's not just simply from that minute-long clip that everyone likes to share of him saying, your soul is in your own keeping, which was, um, I don't know if he actually said that, but was most certainly something he believed. He was a brilliant commander. He had defeated Salah ad-Din multiple times, and he did so at a very young age. I think one of the first battles he fought with him where he won, Baldwin was like 16 and Salah ad-Din was already in his mid 20s or early 30s.
yeah,
Baldwin was a very competent commander and very competent ruler of the
yeah.
kingdom of Jerusalem. It's just unfortunately he had leprosy and he died at the age of 24, I think it was. Um, Salahuddin comes in, and Salahuddin, like, he's making it very clear he's not interested in burning down every church and killing every Christian and forcing people to convert. Actually, in many ways, the Orthodox Christians of Palestine were actually very happy to have Salahuddin,
Okay.
because when the Crusaders came in, they had abolished the Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem, established their own Latin Patriarch, and they had engaged in a whole host of persecutions of the Orthodox Christian Church. So Salah ad-Din comes in, and a lot of the Orthodox are thinking this man is going to bring back peace and stability, give us back our churches. Another great example of this is that actually going back to when When the Rashidun Caliphate came in and conquered the Holy Land in the 7th century, the Sepulchre Church was a very contentious church because you had multiple different denominations fighting over control of it. And so the caliph at the time, whose name escapes me, I apologize, had a very simple solution. We will have a Muslim family control it, be the caretakers of it, promise to keep it open, promise to keep it going and functional. The Orthodox, it will still be the see of the Orthodox Church because it's currently the seat of Patriarch Theophilus III. But it will be free and open to all, and no one person will control it for the sake of keeping peace. And so the Orthodox Christians have always had a more favorable relationship with their Arab Muslim companions and neighbors. Now, when the Turks come in, it becomes a very different story, and it's much more tumultuous.
Yeah. Okay. So we've sort of galloped through the medieval times, and now we're at the point of the Turks and let's say the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. Now,
Yeah.
what changed?
Oh well, I mean, when we're talking about the Turks, we're talking about the Mamluk slaves, and that's who these people were. And there's just some, and these were people who were very. These are people who really had a conquering spirit, and I think in many ways, while no one will doubt that non-Arabs have have a very special relationship with Islam, non-Arab Muslims. I mean, most of the Sunnah was compiled in Iran and modern-day Uzbekistan. I think only one of the Sunnah was compiled in the Arab world in Baghdad, if I'm or near Baghdad.
Yeah, the most famous hadith books of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, such as Sahih al-Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, they all do come from Iran, Persia. You're right.
And several and at least one or two of them are from like modern day Uzbekistan, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, no one will doubt that. But at the same time, the Turks always had a very conquering spirit, and I think for the Turks, um, they always feared non-Sunni rebellion in some form or another.
Hmm.
It's why they would create things like the millet system, where the system essentially is like, yeah, it allowed these people to govern themselves, but the real point of it was to placate them so they felt like they had control of their own affairs. But even then, depending on the sultan, some sultans were very tolerant, other sultans weren't. Um, the Greeks could tell you many stories about how, especially after Constantinople fell, the Turks would forcibly convert many of their churches into mosques, Hagia Sophia being the most famous of them all. And not just Hagia Sophia, but many of them. Many Christians were persecuted under Turkish rule and into the Balkans itself. Like the Janissaries the Janissaries of the Sultan were children, mostly Christian children taken from the Balkans, forcibly converted to Islam to serve as bodyguards and warriors for the Sultan. And in some cases, the poverty in some of these places were so bad that these young Christian families would give their kids, their babies, to the Sultan to become Janissaries because that was the only hope that those kids had of living a life. A poverty that, let's be frank, sometimes was caused by the Ottomans to begin with,
Yeah.
in certain cases. Of course, a lot of the brutality culminates um, at the end of the empire, really. Sorry, in the end stages of the empire, as the empire dies in the 19th century, very late 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, it starts to lash out at its minorities. There is a genocide of Pontan Greeks in the late 19th century, if I'm correct. There is, of course, the brutal Armenian genocide, where 1.5 million Armenians, 750,000 Assyrians and hundreds of thousands of other peoples, such as Greeks,
Yep.
were systematically slaughtered over the course of a couple of years.
Yep.
One of it's and Arabs in general dislike Turkish rule. Even if you weren't a Christian, the Shia of Lebanon, of Syria, were consistently persecuted by the Sunni and strangely, strangely Sufi Ottoman sultans.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the reasons why um, Zahir al-Umar but was able to gain such popularity. The Lebanese Shia loved him because he promised them protection and he promised them tolerance and ability to practice their religion. So they pledged his loyalty to him.
Yeah.
They pledged
Abs
their loyalty.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that persecution of ethnic minorities by the Turks, like as for me, right, I'm from South Lebanon, from Jabal Amil, and you read in the history books, you hear the stories from the natives, when I go back home about the stories of the Turks and the Ottomans. So yeah, that was definitely something that was prevalent. And yeah, sorry,
There's
go
a
ahead.
reason
Yeah,
why the Arabs in general revolted in 1916. There's a reason why they revolted. It's not just simply that, the British asked them to. Like there was a lot of there were there was a lot of just animosity towards the Ottomans, especially you probably know about this, the Mount Lebanon famine from 1915 to 1918 when 200,000 Maronite Catholics starved to death
yeah,
because the governor, Jamal Pasha, refused to relieve a food shortage and it turned into a famine.
there you go. There you go. So yeah, as they were on their way out, these sort of atrocities did happen.
Mhm.
And so to bring it back to Dahr al-Umar now, and speak about what he done and his impact on, let's say, the kingdom of Palestine. So you mentioned at the start that it became a sort of safe haven for Christians, for Jews that would eventually migrate there because they realized that their rights would be protected in that region. And I think this is something that once it was established, it did carry on until the Nakba of 1945 until the
Yeah.
emergence of a ethno-supremacist ideology in political Zionism, which
Mhm.
sought to establish a European settler colony that they
Mhm.
call Israel. So,
Yes.
from what you're saying, Dahir al-Omar had a instrumental role in making Palestine that land for all faith and
Well,
religion.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't say like I mean he very much I mean he was very much continuing on a tradition that had existed for a very long
yeah,
time.
yeah,
You really never like Um, there are there's this book that I was reading and I want to actually find it again where you had these Jewish rabbis that were visiting Palestine in the 15th century, and this book is talking about their experience going there, and many of these rabbis visiting from North Africa, from Eastern Europe, from all over, going to Palestine, noticing how people treated them with great respect and how in Palestine specifically, they were loved and cherished and they were welcomed, and there was a great deal of hospitality. Zahar al-Umar is basically continuing on, and he very much formalizes, really, through his rule, a tradition of just general tolerance that has existed. And now, when I talk about general tolerance, I am not saying that we're all holding hands singing Kumbaya. There are obviously, on occasion, basically once every century instances of political unrest, economic unrest that turns into sectarian violence where and we're not talking about everyone's just slaughtering each other left and right, but you've got villages fighting each other over land or water, and it turns out that one village is mostly Christian, the other village is mostly Muslim, and then that turns into religious hatred. You had a lot of economic and political upheaval that happened in Damascus in 1860 that led to the massacre of thousands of Christians in Damascus. which is, and the Ottomans actually, strangely enough, came in and they were able to establish a political order in Syria and Damascus that would lead to tolerance and peace and goodwill up until 2011 when ISIS comes in and just wrecks the just wrecks everyone's backyard, as it were. But no, the Holometer continues that, and you have very much a like people get along really. I think people forget that, especially because most of the population of Palestine were peasants, Wallahi.
Falahin. Yeah.
And if you ask them, why are you a Muslim? They'd say, because my dad's a Muslim.
Yeah.
Why do you pray 5 times a day? I don't know. My dad does it. Why do you pray towards Mecca? My dad does it. I mean, his dad did it, and his dad did it before him, and his dad did it before him. And the same for the Christians. Why are you a Christian? Well, my father's a Christian. This village is Christian. We've always been Christian. That's why I go to church and all that. They don't think too much about their faith. I mean, they are devout and they believe it, but when
Yeah.
you really ask why, they're like, I don't know, it's just who we are. It's what we do. Um, it's not until like the establishment of Zionism, right? And more specifically, because maybe I'm sort of veering off topic from the question here, but I think it's important. The Zionists come in and they are helped by the British. Now, the mandate system was created post World War One as an excuse to basically colonize the Middle East. The Europeans were like, "Oh, well, you Arabs are too stupid for self governance, so we're going to teach you how to be self sufficient." Also, Iraq protects our pipeline from India going straight to Haifa. Total coincidence. But this is the white man's burden, the beautiful us being kind to you. And what happens is that the Palestinians, they're ready for statehood because the Palestinians had put all their political will and effort into a kingdom of Syria, the kingdom of Syria that Faisal bin Hashim was going to rule, which was the promise given to them if the Arabs revolted. The Arabs revolt against the Ottomans, you'll have an independent state governed by the Hashemites. This promise was betrayed, and the Palestinians had put so much hope into that. And what happened is they are trying to rebuild. So what you have are these Muslim Christian organizations that are trying to create. Okay, let's create our own state. It'll be a basic parliamentary representative government, And what happens is the British realize we can't have this because if the Palestinians are fully aware of the fact that their only enemy are the British and these European Zionists, these European Jews that are very much foreign to Palestine and they're very foreign to the Palestinian Jews, who are basically culturally Arabs. I mean, these Palestinian Jews, they don't speak Yiddish, they don't speak Russian or Polish, they speak Arabic. When they use Hebrew, they're using Tiberian Hebrew for their liturgical services, for their prayer services. These people speak Arabic. And it's only, and they're not really interested. These Palestinian Jews are not interested in Zionism. They want them to go away because they think that the Zionists are causing trouble. So, but what happens is that the British realize, oh, if the Palestinians are united against us, then that's a problem. So what they do is they undermine the Muslim Christian associations, and they start really funding overtly Islamic institutions and overtly Islamic political parties, with the hopes that this would make the Christians feel ostracized and isolated, and maybe the Christians would go to the British for protection. The Christians never really went to the British for protection because no one really liked the British around and no one really liked the Zionists. But what ended up happening is that by the late 20s and early 30s, all of a sudden Palestinians really become aware of the fact that they are Muslims
Yeah.
and bickering between the different families, like, oh, you're a Nashashibi, you're a Husseini, you're a Khalili. Well, how about we're all just Muslims? Why don't we just toss these European invaders off our lands, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how it sort of ultimately backfired. These policies backfired on the British, leading to the 35 revolt of Izzuddin al-Qassam
Hmm.
and the 36 General Arab Revolt.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I mean, if we're gonna link all of this to currently what's happening and the genocide in Gaza, seeing as we're
Yes.
sort of running out of time, we've got 8 minutes left to wrap this up. So, what we're seeing is a genocide of all Palestinians.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
it's clearly evident. I mean, just the other day I was scrolling on social media and there was a church that was bombed. The nuns were describing their experience, Palestinian nuns. So again, I feel like this is something that's also overlooked when it comes
It's
to
very much overlooked because
yeah.
prior to the invasion, there were 1,000 Christians living in Gaza. Now
Mm,
there's maybe 600 because 400 of them have been killed. The Church of St. Porphyrius has been hit hard, not just from the initial airstrike, but the members are simply dying either from starvation or the elderly members are dying because they can't get medical care. They can't the dialysis. They need diabetes medication, heart medication. They can't get the care they need. There's wounded who've died from their wounds because they can't get to hospitals. And then there's just the fact that the Israelis are just sniping these people. There was unfortunately when a mother and her daughter were sniped and killed outside the Holy Family Catholic Parish. There was another woman who was known as Mother Orange because she had this big shock of bright red hair, and she was beloved throughout Gaza because she taught music, and she was a very skilled musician herself and had written some music about Gaza and Palestine. And like we are always in the in the minds of the Western people, we are always forgotten because when they think of Palestinians, they think of these crazed Wahhabi fanatics that simply want to kill all the Jews and they want to bring their they want to bring jihad to America for some reason. I mean, that's never but it's never really fully explained. Oh, they hate us for our freedoms, even though, they live pretty peaceably back home and they don't. It's and besides the demonization and dehumanization of the Palestinian Muslims, the Palestinian Christian is forgotten. And even when the Palestinian Christian is mentioned, well, he's considered, oh, well, that's because he's a dhimmi. He's a sellout. He's a
mm,
willing slave to the Muslims who mistreat him, which is not the case. 95% of all Palestinians, and this is an aggregate of several polls, 95% of Palestinian Christians who have left the West Bank and Jerusalem say that they left because of Israel. They left because of the settlements. They left
yep.
because of the checkpoints. They left because they feel like they're being pushed off their land. They can't get any opportunity because of this oppressive military occupation that dominates and domineers every aspect of their lives. And historically speaking, the Christians are wealthier than the average Christian is wealthier than the average Muslim, so he has more of an opportunity to leave. And because it was actually Palestinian Christians that first started immigrating from Palestine in the late 19th, early 20th century, they have these established communities that they are able to easily go into and integrate in, specifically in Central America for some reason. I don't know why. They all just loved El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. In Ecuador. I don't know why, but that's where they all went. And that's why they leave. That's why we are a forgotten people in a 100-year conflict, frankly. And it's it's sad. I try to do my best to talk about it and to make people aware of us and to make people aware that the Zionists don't like us and they want to see our churches destroyed and they want to see us driven out as well because to them this is Jewish land.
Yes, yes, and in some videos that you see in the West Bank, when, for example, a priest walks by, some extremist followers of the Jewish faith, you see the reaction and what they do.
Oh, they spit on priests, they harass them,
Yep,
they'll write graffiti blaspheming against Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary, the stuff I will not repeat. There's arson in 2015. In 1980, the Baptist Church of Jerusalem was burnt down. In 2014, the church built on the spot where Christ multiplied the fish and loaves was burnt down. There's been several other attacks on churches ever since. Um, the Christians in the West Bank and especially in Jerusalem live on the edge and on unease. In fact, an Israeli reporter made an experiment where he wore the habit of a Franciscan monk and he walked alongside a Franciscan monk in Jerusalem, and he was verbally harassed. He was pushed around a little bit, and in fact, when he walked by a squad of IDF soldiers, several of them said mocking things, and one of them actually spat on him. And I want you to think about this. Some IDF soldier spat on a priest in the presence of his commanding officer and thought nothing of it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you see how systemic this hatred is.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and it's clearly evident in what's going on in Gaza now. So, I mean, over 40,000 innocent civilians have been killed. Uh,
That's what we
yeah,
can. That's the estimate we have. When the reality is, the number is.
yeah, uh,
I I think the number's close to six digits at this point. I really do.
unbelievable, unbelievable, and the
It's
fact that yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
well, it's just like the health system, the health ministry, and the health system in Gaza like cannot keep up. They can't keep up with the records. There's so many people buried that are unaccounted for. There's people in northern Gaza where there's basically nothing. God knows who's dead, who's alive, who's starved. Bodies can't be recognized. Bodies that have literally been obliterated into nothing. I mean, Ralph Nader actually wrote an interesting article where he thinks the number is at or near six digits.
Yeah, it's horror. It's clear horror what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza. And listen, it's been a real eye opener to hear from your perspective. And again, it really does reinforce the point that Palestinians are not just Muslims, they're Christians, and they are all suffering because of this ethno-supremacist ideology and because of this European settler colony. And as always, keep boycotting Free Palestine, keep protesting. This is a message to all anyone who watches this video. And
From the
what we
river to
will
the sea, baby. From the river to the
exactly,
sea.
exactly. And please do check out Isaac's content. I'll post a link in the description of this video. Isaac, thanks for coming on, man.
God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.